The mansion on Hanamdong Hill had no music, no laughter, no warmth, just the sound of a clock that never stopped and a man who never lay down. Kong Jae-min Okoye sat alone in the dark, 38 years old and already ancient. His eyes, black and ringed with 6 years of sleeplessness, stared through floor-to-ceiling glass at a soul that sparkled without him. No one spoke to him unless spoken of first. No one touched what belonged to him. No one looked at his daughter. And no one dared break the silence. Until a woman with deep brown skin and steady hands carried a suitcase through the front gate, looked up at the towering iron doors, and whispered a prayer in Igbo. She didn't know the house would change her. She didn't know he had been waiting. A quick note before we begin. If stories about forbidden love, unspoken pain, and the kind of connection that burns slowly until it consumes everything speak to your soul, you're in the right place. This one is going to stay with you for a while. So settle in, get comfortable, and let me take you somewhere dangerous. Asterisk. Back-end index pointing right, please like, share, and subscribe. The Silent House. Arrival. The taxi driver wouldn't go past the second gate. Here, he said in Korean, not looking at her. I stop here. Amara Okafor understood. She'd been in Seoul for 11 months, long enough to know that fear had a shape in this city. It looked like tall walls and men in black standing still as statues. It looked like a neighborhood where even delivery drivers left packages at the bottom of the hill. She paid the fare. She thanked him. She lifted her single suitcase and her canvas bag of books and began walking. The late October air bit through her coat. Seoul autumn was nothing like Lagos. Back home, October meant the tail end of rainy season, warm puddles, the smell of red earth, her mother's voice calling her inside before the mosquitoes came. Here, the wind came from the mountains and smelled like nothing. Just cold. She climbed the hill. The driveway was long, maybe 200 meters of polished stone lined with Japanese maples whose leaves had turned the color of fire. Beautiful. Deliberate. Everything in this place was deliberate. A man in a dark suit waited at the main entrance. He was tall, Korean, with a face that had been trained to show nothing. You are Amara Okafor, he said. Not a question. Yes. I am director you. I manage the household. You will refer to Mr. Kong as Sir. You will not touch anything in the East Wing. You will not enter the third floor. You will complete your duties, eat in the staff quarters, and be in your room by 10. He paused. Do you have questions? Where is the kitchen? Director Yu blinked. Of all the things she might have asked about the armed guards, about the cameras she'd spotted embedded in the stone archway, about the eerie silence of a house this large, she asked about the kitchen. Down the main hall. Second left. Thank you. She walked inside. The mansion was enormous. Not ostentatious. There were no gold fixtures, no crystal chandeliers. Instead, it was the kind of expensive that whispered. Floors of dark walnut. Walls of pale stone. Art that she suspected was original. One painting alone could probably feed a village in Delta State for a year. But the silence. God, the silence. Amara had grown up in a house full of noise. Her father playing high-life music on Saturday mornings. Her mother arguing with the neighbors about fence boundaries. Her younger brothers wrestling in the hallway. Noise meant life. Noise meant people were alive and cared enough to make sound. This house felt like the inside of a coffin. She set her suitcase down in the small room director you had designated. A clean, sparse space with a single bed, a window overlooking the back garden, and a wooden dresser. Staff quarters, but nicer than anywhere she'd lived since leaving Nigeria. She unpacked quickly. Clothes. Toiletries. Her worn copy of Things Fall Apart. And at the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in cloth, a small framed photograph of a woman playing piano. She placed the photo on the dresser and pressed her fingers to the glass. I'm here, Mama, she whispered. I'm going to be fine. She didn't know if she believed it. The rules of the house. By her second day, Amara understood the hierarchy. There were 12 staff members. A cook named Mrs. Bay, who was 62 and had worked in the house for 9 years. 2 drivers. 3 security men who rotated shifts. A gardener. 2 other maids, both Korean, both visibly terrified at all times. a personal assistant to Mr. Kong named Sung Ho, who never made eye contact with anyone below his pay grade, and Director Yu, who moved through the house like a ghost managing other ghosts. And then there was the daughter, Hannah. No one spoke about Hannah. Amara noticed the way the other maids cleaned the second floor with their heads down, moving fast, never lingering near the room at the end of the hall. She noticed how Mrs. Bay prepared a tray every evening, rice, soup, side dishes, and left on a table outside that door, then walked away without knocking. Who lives there? Amara asked on her second evening. Mrs. Bay looked at her the way someone looks at a person who's just lit a match near gasoline. Don't ask questions, the old woman said. Clean. Cook when I need help. Stay out of the east wing. And don't go near that room. Why? Because the last person who went near that room isn't here anymore. Mrs. Bay turned back to her pot. The conversation was over, but Amara couldn't stop thinking about the tray. The untouched tray she'd noticed that morning, still sitting outside the door, the soup cold, the rice dry. Someone in that room wasn't eating. The man who never slept. She saw him for the first time on the third night. Amara couldn't sleep. The time difference still lingered, and the silence of the house pressed against her chest like a weight. At 2:17 a.m., she slipped out of her room to get water from the kitchen. The hallway was dark. Not fully. Small lights along the baseboard cast amber pools on the floor, but dark enough that she moved carefully, one hand trailing the wall. She turned the corner into the main living space and stopped. A man sat in a leather chair by the window. He was perfectly still, not sleeping. She could tell by the angle of his spine, the tension in his shoulders. He was awake, fully, completely awake, staring at the city below with the expression of someone watching a fire that had burned down everything he loved. She recognized him from photographs. Kong Jae-min Okoye. The photographs did not do him justice. They hadn't captured the weight of him, not his body, though he was tall and broad, the kind of physical presence that changed the air pressure in a room. It was something else, something that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Pain. 6 years of it, compressed into silence. She saw the tattoo first. It curved up from beneath his collar, climbing the left side of his neck. A dragon and a lion, intertwined, their bodies forming an unbroken circle. Korean and West African symbolism fused into a single design. The dragon scales were rendered in traditional Minhwa style, while the lion's mane flowed in patterns that reminded her of Yoruba scarification art. It was beautiful, and it looked like a wound. He hadn't noticed her, or he had, and he was choosing not to acknowledge her. Amara turned to leave. The water is in the second cabinet. His voice stopped her. Low, quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it carried authority like a current carries a river. She turned back. He hadn't moved, hadn't looked at her. Thank you, she said. Silence. She found the glass, poured the water, drank, set the glass in the sink. When she turned around, he was looking at her. The air left her lungs. His eyes were extraordinary, dark as onyx, but lit from behind by something. Intelligence, danger, exhaustion, hunger. They moved over her face with a precision that felt almost surgical, cataloging, assessing, reading. You're the new one, he said. Yes, sir. You're Nigerian. Yes, sir. Your Korean is good. I practiced for a year before I came. Why? The question caught her off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because of the way he asked it, as if her answer genuinely mattered. I wanted to belong here, she said, even if it was only through language. Something shifted in his expression. It was barely perceptible, a micro-movement around his eyes, a softening that lasted less than a second before the mask returned. Go to bed, he said. She went, but she didn't sleep for a long time. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the way he'd looked at her. Not with suspicion, not with the clinical dismissal of a man who saw staff as furniture. With curiosity, and something else. Something she couldn't name, but could feel like standing at the edge of a cliff and sensing the drop before looking down. Hannah. It happened on the fourth morning. Amara was cleaning the second floor hallway, dusting the frames, wiping the glass panels, moving carefully past the door at the end that everyone avoided. Mrs. Bay had asked her to do the second floor today, while the other maids handled the ground level. Quickly, Mrs. Bay had said, "Don't linger." But as Amara passed the forbidden door, she heard something. A sound, soft, muffled, coming from inside. It took her a moment to place it. Crying. Not loud, the kind of crying that happens when someone has been doing it so long they've learned to make themselves small with it. Amara stopped. She looked down the hallway. Empty. She looked at the door. The tray from last night sat on the table, untouched again. The rice was 2 days old now. She knocked. The crying stopped instantly. Amara waited. No response. She knocked again gently. "Hello," she said in Korean. "My name is Amara. I'm the new maid. I just wanted to check if you need anything." Silence. Amara was about to leave when the door opened 3 inches. A face appeared in the gap. Young, Korean, with large eyes that were swollen and red. Hair uncombed. Skin pale from lack of sun. She wore an oversized sweater that hung past her hands. Hannah Okoye, 20 years old and as fragile as paper. She looked at Amara with an expression Amara recognized. The expression of someone who has been invisible for so long that being seen is frightening. Amara looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. "I brought you something," Amara said. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small paper cup of the jollof rice she'd made that morning with Mrs. Bay's reluctant permission. She'd cooked it the way her mother did, with Scotch bonnet peppers smuggled from the international market in Itaewon and a whisper of thyme. She held it out. Hannah looked at the cup, then at Amara. Her eyes were wide, confused, uncertain. "I can't hear well," Hannah signed. Her hands moved in Korean Sign Language, KSL, fast, practiced, but with the stiffness of someone who rarely had anyone to sign to. "I'm deaf." Almost completely. Amara set the cup down on the table beside the tray. Then she lifted her hands. "I know," she signed back. Asterisk, "I learned. Before I came to Korea, I studied KSL." Asterisk. Hannah's hands dropped to her sides. Her lips parted. Her eyes, those enormous, exhausted eyes, filled with something Amara hadn't seen in them before. Disbelief. Then, slowly, Hannah's hands rose again. Asterisk, "Why?" Asterisk, she signed. Asterisk, "Why would you learn?" Asterisk, "Because everyone deserves to be spoken to," Amara signed. Asterisk, "Not just spoken about." Asterisk. The tears came fast. Hannah pressed both hands to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. And then she did something that surprised them both. She opened the door wider and let Amara in. The watcher. From the security monitor in his study, Kong Jae-min watched. The screen showed the second-floor hallway, a live feed from the camera he'd installed 4 years ago when Hannah had first stopped leaving her room. He watched the new maid, Amara, knock on his daughter's door. He watched the door open. He watched them communicate with their hands. He watched his daughter cry. His jaw tightened. The dragon and lion tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with his heartbeat as he leaned closer to the screen. His fingers, resting on the desk, curled slowly into a fist. No one had gotten through to Hannah in 3 years. Not the therapists. Not the tutors he'd hired. Not even the counselor from the National Deaf Institute, who came every other Thursday and left looking defeated. And this woman, this stranger he'd hired from an agency 3 days ago because his usual service was short-staffed, walked up to that door, knocked, and spoke to his daughter in a language she could understand. He hadn't authorized that. He hadn't anticipated it. And that made it dangerous. Jae-min pressed the intercom button. "Director, you?" "Yes, sir." "The new maid, Amara Okafor." "Yes, sir." "Where did she learn sign language?" A pause. "I'll look into it, sir." "Now." The intercom clicked off. Jae-min leaned back in his chair and pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. Sleep. The need for it was a physical thing, a heaviness behind his eyes, a fog that lived at the edges of his vision. 6 years, 2,191 nights without closing his eyes and trusting the dark. He tried everything. Medications, meditation, a sensory deprivation chamber in the basement that he'd used exactly once before the silence became unbearable, because in the silence, he heard her voice. Yuna, his wife, dead, gone. and somehow still everywhere in this house. He looked back at the monitor. Amara was sitting on Hannah's bed now, cross-legged, signing something that was making Hannah laugh. Actually laugh, her shoulders bouncing, her hand covering her mouth. When was the last time he'd heard his daughter laugh? He couldn't remember. Something stirred in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in so long that he almost didn't recognize it. Need. Not desire. Not yet. Something deeper and more frightening. The need to understand what this woman was. 2 weeks later. Routine. Amara settled into the house like water filling a crack. She woke early. She helped Mrs. Bay in the kitchen, learning Korean recipes with the same methodical focus she'd applied to learning the language. She cleaned the room she was assigned. She followed every rule director you had laid out. Except one. Every morning, after the upstairs hallway was done, she stopped at Hannah's door. It became ritual. She knocked twice. The door would open, and for 45 minutes to an hour, Amara would sit with the girl and talk with her hands. She learned that Hannah had been born with partial hearing that had deteriorated completely by age 14. She learned that Hannah had attended a specialized school until age 17, when her father, after her mother's death, had pulled her out and hired private tutors instead. She learned that the last tutor had quit 6 months ago and no replacement had been found. She learned that Hannah loved art, that the walls of her room, behind the curtains, were covered in charcoal drawings, dark, beautiful, haunting landscapes of places she'd never been. Mountains, forests, an ocean with no shore. Your father doesn't see these? Amara signed one morning, gesturing at the drawings. Hannah's expression closed. She shook her head. He doesn't come here, she signed. Asterisk, never. Asterisk, asterisk. He stands in the hallway sometimes. Late at night, I can feel the vibration of his footsteps, but he doesn't knock. Asterisk. Amara felt something twist in her chest. A father who couldn't reach his daughter. A daughter who counted his footsteps as the closest thing to conversation. He loves you, Amara signed. Hannah looked at her with eyes far too old for 20. He loves control. Hannah signed back. Asterisk. Love and control are not the same. Asterisk. Amara didn't argue. She wasn't sure Hannah was wrong. Eyes. She started feeling it in the second week. The sensation of being watched. Not by the cameras. She'd identified 6 of those and assumed there were more. This was different. This was human. The weight of a gaze that had substance, that pressed against the back of her neck like a warm hand. It happened when she was cleaning the main living area, when she was in the kitchen, kneading dough, when she walked through the garden in the early morning, talking to her mother in Igbo under her breath. He was always somewhere nearby. She'd catch a reflection in a window, his silhouette in a doorway. She'd turn a corner and find a door slowly closing. Once, she reached for a book in the hallway library and found it still warm from another hand. Kong Jae-min was watching her, not threatening, not following, just observing. The way a predator watches something it hasn't decided whether to hunt or protect. She should have been afraid. The other staff certainly were. She'd watched Mrs. Bay drop a spoon when Mr. Kong entered the kitchen one evening, then stand frozen, trembling, until he left. She'd watched Director Yu break into a sweat when Jae-min asked a question he didn't immediately have the answer to. But Amara wasn't afraid. She'd grown up in a house with a father who played drums so loud the neighbors 3 streets away complained. She'd walked to school in Lagos traffic that would terrify a soldier. She'd navigated immigration offices in a language she barely spoke, with money she could barely spare, armed only with determination and a stubbornness her mother said was hereditary. Fear was familiar to her. She knew its shape, its texture, its tricks. And the man in this house, for all his power, for all his silence, did not feel like something to be afraid of. He felt like something to be understood. On the 15th night, she was in the kitchen at midnight, making tea for herself because sleep wouldn't come, when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. You can have some, she said. If you want. Silence. Then the footsteps moved closer. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, close enough that she caught his scent, sandalwood, black coffee, and something underneath that was purely, unmistakably him. He didn't take the tea. How is she? He asked. Amara poured a second cup anyway. Lonely, she said. Brilliant. Angry. She draws the most beautiful things I've ever seen. She hides them behind curtains because she thinks no one wants to see them. A muscle in his jaw tightened. The tattoo on his neck, that fusion of dragon and lion, seemed to move in the low kitchen light. She hasn't shown me her work since she was 16, he said. Maybe because the last person who showed interest in her work left. He turned to look at her. Full face. Direct. The force of his attention was almost physical, like standing in the beam of a searchlight. What do you know about that? He asked. His voice was controlled, but underneath it, barely audible, was something raw. The previous tutor. She told Hannah she'd come back the next day. She didn't. Hannah waited by the window for 3 days. She told you this? She signs very well when she trusts someone. And she trusts you? After 2 weeks, Amara finally turned to face him. They were standing close, closer than staff and employers should be. She had to look up slightly. He was tall, and the proximity made the details of him suddenly sharp. The stubble along his jaw, the shadows under his eyes that never fully faded, the small scar on his left cheekbone that she'd never noticed before. She trusts me, Amara said, because I show up. Every day, at the same time, even when she doesn't open the door. I knock, and I say good morning, and I leave a drawing pencil outside if she wants it. Jae-min stared at her. His eyes moved over her face, her dark brown skin, her wide-set eyes, the small gold stud in her left ear, the way she held his gaze without flinching. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't a question. No, sir. That's either very brave or very foolish. Maybe it's neither. Maybe I just see someone who's tired. The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes cracked, just for a moment, like light through a fracture in stone. He picked up the cup she'd poured. Drank. Set it down. Don't call me sir, he said. Then he walked out. Amara stood in the kitchen for a long time after he left, her heart beating in a rhythm she didn't recognize. Drawings. That Saturday, Hannah showed Amara something she'd never shown anyone. She led Amara to the far corner of her room, behind the heavy curtains, and pulled back a section of wallpaper to reveal a charcoal portrait. A woman. Korean. Beautiful. Laughing. She was sitting at a piano, her fingers on the keys, her head turned as if someone had just called her name, and she was looking up with joy. Your mother. Amara signed. Hannah nodded. Her eyes were dry but deep, like wells that had held so much water they'd memorized the shape of it. I drew this from memory, Hannah signed. Asterisk, I was 7. She used to play piano every evening. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. It was how I knew music. Asterisk. Amara looked at the portrait. The skill was extraordinary, the shading, the emotion captured in the curve of a smile. Hannah had drawn not just a face, but a feeling. You miss her, Amara signed. Asterisk. Everyone misses her. That's not what I feel. Asterisk. Asterisk. What do you feel? Asterisk. Hannah paused. Her hands hovered, uncertain, like birds deciding whether to land. Angry, she signed finally. Asterisk because she left. Because he changed. Because this house became a cage. Because no one talks to me like I'm real. Asterisk. She looked at Amara. Asterisk until you. Asterisk. Amara reached out and took Hannah's hands. It was an instinct, the kind of touch she'd grown up with, the physical language of comfort that ran through her culture like a river. Hannah flinched. Then she didn't. They sat there, hands connected, in a room full of hidden art and sunlight that came through the curtains in thin, golden bars. The gala. The annual Kong Foundation Charity Gala was the most exclusive event in Seoul's social calendar. Every year, the city's elite gathered at the Grand Hyatt to drink champagne and pretend they cared about education reform, while Jae-min sat at the head table like a king surveying a court he despised. This year, Mrs. Bae was sick. I can't cook for the household staff and prep the dessert trays for the gala, the old woman said, her face gray with fever. Director, you will have my head. I'll handle the desserts, Amara said. You don't know the recipes. Teach me. Mrs. Bae stared at her. Then, With the grudging respect of a woman who had spent her life being underestimated, she pulled out a notebook and began to explain. Amara worked for 14 hours straight. She made black sesame financiers. She made yuzu tarts with torch meringue. She made mochi filled with chestnut paste. And at Mrs. Bay's suggestion, she added one dish of her own, small puff-puff balls drizzled with a honey ginger glaze, a Nigerian street food elevated for a Korean table. The dessert trays were loaded into the van. At 7 p.m. Amara was exhausted, flour-dusted, and expecting to collapse in a bed. "Director, you found her in the kitchen. You're coming to the gala," he said. "What?" "Mr. Kang's personal assistant is ill. He needs a server for his private table. You're the only one who won't embarrass us. Change. Quickly. I'm staff director you. Tonight, you're useful. That's all that matters. Wear the black uniform. And don't speak unless you're spoken to." Amara looked down at her flour-dusted hands. She thought about Hannah, alone upstairs. She thought about the drawing of the laughing woman at the piano. She changed. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom was a galaxy of chandeliers and silk. 300 guests moved through the space like planets in expensive orbits. Amara, dressed in a staff uniform, black dress, white collar, hair pulled back, moved between tables with plates and poured wine with steady hands. She avoided his table as long as she could, but eventually, inevitably, her shift brought her there. Jaemin sat at the center of a long table surrounded by men in suits and women in dresses that cost more than Amara's apartment in Lagos. He was the still point in a room of motion, listening, watching, saying little. The tattoo on his neck was visible above his white collar, and she noticed how the men beside him angled their bodies slightly away, as if proximity to him required permission. She approached with the dessert tray, set a plate before the woman to his left, moved to the next guest. Efficient, invisible. When she reached Jaemin, she set his plate down without looking at him. "What is this?" he asked. She glanced down. The plate held 3 puff-puff balls, golden and glistening, their honey ginger glaze catching the light. "Nigerian dessert," she said quietly. "Mrs. Bay was sick. I cooked." He looked at the plate, then at her, then at the plate again. He picked one up, bit into it. The room continued around them. Conversation, laughter, the clink of glasses. But at that small corner of the long table, something shifted. She watched him chew, watched his expression change, not dramatically, but enough. A softness around his mouth, a flicker in his tired eyes. He finished the piece, reached for another. "Tell Mrs. Bay she's fired," he said. Amara's eyes widened. "I'm joking," he said. She stared at him. In 3 weeks, she had never, not once, heard Kong Jaemin Okoye make a joke. The realization must have shown on her face because the corner of his mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. She turned to leave before the feeling in her chest could become something she couldn't control. "Amara." She stopped. He'd never said her name before. The way it sounded in his voice, the slightly roughened consonants, the careful vowels, made her name feel like something precious and dangerous. "Yes." "The puff-puff. Can you make more?" "Yes." "Then make more." She walked away, and she didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her for the rest of the night, a weight that followed her through every room, every conversation, every moment. Not threatening, not commanding, watching, the way someone watches the only light in a room full of dark. The other man, his name was Park Dae-young, 34, vice president of a shipping conglomerate that Amara later learned was a front for one of Jaemin's rival syndicates. Handsome in the way Korean dramas taught women to want. Sharp jaw, soft eyes, a smile designed to disarm. He found her in the hallway outside the ballroom, returning from the kitchen with a fresh tray. "You made the puff-puff," he said, stepping into her path. Amara stopped. "Excuse me." "The Nigerian dessert. I had 3 plates. It was extraordinary. You're a chef. I'm a maid. A maid who cooks like that? Seoul doesn't deserve you." He smiled, warm, practiced a little too close. "Park Dae-young. And you are?" She told him her name. He repeated it as if tasting it. "Amara. Beautiful. It means grace, doesn't it?" "In Igbo." She was surprised. "You know Igbo?" "I know many things." He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. I also know that a woman like you shouldn't be carrying trays. If you ever want something different, Ms. Okafor. The voice came from behind them. Jaemin stood at the end of the hallway, his hands in his pockets, his posture casual, and his expression anything but. The tattoo climbed his neck like a living thing. Mr. Kong requires your presence. Director, you said, materializing beside Jaemin. Park Dae-young straightened. His smile faltered. Jaemin, I was just leaving, Jaemin said. The word was quiet. Final. Absolute. Park Dae-young looked at Amara one more time. Something passed through his eyes. Curiosity, calculation, maybe concern. Then he left. The hallway emptied. Director, you disappeared. And Amara found herself alone with Kong Jae-min, who hadn't moved. He walked toward her slowly. Each step was deliberate, measured. He stopped when he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Did he bother you? He asked. No. Did he touch you? No. He was being friendly. I know what friendly looks like. His voice was still controlled, but underneath it, underneath the calm surface, something was coiling. That wasn't friendly. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. 4, 5. Then he turned and walked away, and Amara realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the look in his eyes when he'd asked if someone had touched her. A look that said mine before any words of possession had ever been spoken. Breaking rules. After the gala, things changed. Jaemin began appearing in rooms she was in, not following her. She could tell the difference between surveillance and coincidence, and this was neither. It was gravitational, as if her presence in a space created a field that pulled him. She'd be reading in the small sitting room off the kitchen, and he'd walk through, pour himself coffee, and sit in the adjacent chair without speaking. They'd exist in silence for 20, 30, 40 minutes. His presence was enormous, warm and terrifying in equal measure. One evening, she was humming while she cleaned the windows in the main hall. An old song, Sweet Mother by Prince Nico Mbarga, the melody that had lived in her bones since childhood. She didn't realize she was doing it until the silence of the house registered, and she turned to find Jimin standing in the doorway, listening. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his dark eyes fixed on her, the tattoo on his neck catching the last of the evening light. She stopped. Don't, he said. Don't what? Stop. She looked at him. He looked at her. It was a good song, he said. Then he left. That night, Amara lay in her bed and pressed her hands over her face because she could feel something happening, something she'd come to this country to escape. She'd come to Seoul to rebuild, to work, to send money home, to disappear into a life so small and structured that the chaos of her past couldn't find her. She had not come to feel. And yet, the way he said her name, the way he watched her as if she were the only real thing in a house full of ghosts, the way his daughter was beginning to smile, the way the silence between them had started to feel not empty but full, charged with something unspoken that grew stronger every day. She was falling, and she knew, with the instinct of a woman who had survived everything, that falling for Kong Jae-min was the most dangerous thing she could do. The photograph. It was Director Yu who brought the file. 1 month into her employment, Amara returned from the market to find a single photograph placed on her bed. She picked it up. It was old, taken with a film camera, slightly grainy. A street, a market, an African city, and in the corner of the frame, partially obscured by a fruit stand, a young black woman was looking directly at the camera. Amara's blood went cold. She was looking at herself, 3 years younger, standing in a market in Lagos, the same market where, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, she had witnessed something that had shattered her life. A murder. She hadn't meant to see it. She'd been buying plantains. She'd heard shouting, turned, and watched 2 men drag a third into an alley. She'd heard the shot. She'd frozen. And then she'd run. She'd told no one. Not the police. Not her family. Because the men had seen her. They'd looked at her as she fled. And 3 days later, someone had left a note under her family's door. We know who you are. She'd left Lagos within the week. But this photograph proved that the past she'd run from had followed her to Seoul. Someone in this house knew. Someone had placed this on her bed as a message. Her hands trembled. She sat on the edge of the mattress, the photograph between her fingers, her heart a wild thing beating against the cage of her ribs. There was a knock at her door. She shoved the photograph under her pillow and opened it. Jamin stood in the hallway. He looked at her face, at the fear she couldn't hide, at the moisture in her eyes, at the way she held herself like something about to break. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. They walked through the back garden in silence. The October air had turned sharp, and Amara's breath came in thin clouds. Jamin wore no coat. The cold didn't seem to reach him, or he didn't care. He stopped beside a stone bench beneath a magnolia tree. "Sit," he said. She sat. He remained standing, looking down at her, the moonlight catching the silver threads in the tattoo's design. "I know about Lagos," he said. The world tilted. Amara gripped the edge of the bench. "I know about the market. The man who died. The men who saw you. The note under the door." "Ow!" Her voice cracked. "I have resources. When I hire someone to live in my home, near my daughter, I investigate. Every detail. Every shadow." He paused. His jaw tightened. The tattoo seemed to darken in the low light. "The man who was killed that day," he said slowly, "was named Kim Tae-ho. He was my wife's brother." Amara's breath stopped. "The men who killed him were working for a rival syndicate. The same syndicate that has been trying to destroy my operations for 8 years. He turned to face her fully. "And you were there. You saw it. You are, as far as I know, the only witness." "I never told anyone," she whispered. "I know. That's why you're still alive." The words hung in the air between them, cold and heavy. "Then why am I here?" she asked. "Why hire me? Why let me near your daughter if you knew who I was from the beginning?" Jamin looked at her for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was the quietest she'd ever heard it, barely more than an exhale. "Because your file said you learned KSL. Because the agency described you as someone who sees people, not positions. Because Hannah hasn't let anyone near her in 3 years, and he stopped. His hands, which had been still at his sides, curled slowly. "I don't know how to reach my own daughter. I've tried. I've failed. I've watched her disappear into a room I can't enter." He looked up at the sky. When he spoke again, the control in his voice had a crack in it. "I hired you because I was desperate, and I kept you because you walked into a house full of fear and didn't add to it." Amara stood. They were close now, closer than they'd been that night in the kitchen. She could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the tremor in his hands that he fought to still, the way his eyes, those dark, dangerous, beautiful eyes, held hers with an intensity that felt like a confession. "You should have told me," she said. "Would you have stayed?" She didn't answer, because the truth, the terrifying, undeniable truth, was yes. She would have stayed, not for safety, not for money, for Hannah, who was learning to smile again, for this man, who stood in the dark every night because he was afraid of what the silence would say if he stopped moving, and for herself, for the feeling she got when he looked at her, a feeling like being seen completely by someone who had forgotten how to see. "The photograph," she said, "you put in my room. I needed you to understand the danger. What you saw in Lagos makes you a target. The people who killed Kim Tae-ho are still active. If they find out you're here in my house, then I'm putting Hannah at risk." "Yes." The word was a blade. "I'll leave," Amara said. The words came out steady, but something inside her screamed. "No." She looked at him. "You're not leaving," he said. And this time, there was nothing controlled about his voice. It was raw, rough, the sound of a man who hadn't slept in 6 years and had just realized that the only rest he'd ever find was standing in front of him. "I didn't show you that photograph to make you run. I showed you because I need you to understand what you're in the middle of. And then I need you to decide, with your eyes open, whether you'll stay. Why does my decision matter to you?" He looked at her, and the crack in his control widened, just enough for her to see through it, into the place where Kong Jae-min Okoye kept the things he couldn't afford to feel. "Because nothing has mattered to me in 6 years," he said. "And you." He stopped, pressed his lips together, looked away. The magnolia tree shifted in the wind above them, its leaves whispering. "Go inside," he said. "Lock your door." He walked away, and Amara stood in the garden, shaking, her heart so full and so frightened that she couldn't tell the difference between the two. The shift. She stayed. Not because he asked. Not because she wasn't afraid. She stayed because she looked at the photograph again that night. Really looked and realized something she'd missed before. The camera angle. The grain of the film. It wasn't a surveillance photo taken by the killers. It was taken from above. From a window. Someone else had been watching that day. Someone who had kept the photograph for 3 years. Someone who had used it not as a threat, but as a key, a way to open a conversation he didn't know how to begin. He'd been protecting her, from a distance, for longer than she knew. The thought made her chest ache. Over the next 2 weeks, the dynamic between them became something neither of them could name. He didn't avoid her anymore. He appeared in the kitchen when she was cooking, standing by the counter, arms crossed, watching her hands as they worked. He asked her about Nigeria, not politely, the way strangers do, but with a genuine, almost hungry curiosity that made her talk for an hour without realizing it. He told her nothing about himself in return, but she started learning him anyway, through observation, the way she'd learned everything that mattered. She learned that he drank his coffee black and never finished a cup, that he had a habit of rolling his left thumb across his fingertips when he was thinking, that the tattoo on his neck, she now saw it continued down his shoulder and across his collarbone, the dragon becoming the lion, becoming something else entirely, was done in stages over years, each section marking something. She learned that when Hannah laughed, really laughed, a sound that happened more and more often now, something in Jaemin's face would shift. A pain so deep, it was almost beautiful, the expression of a man hearing a language he'd forgotten existed. And she learned that he wasn't sleeping. Not just rarely, never. She'd seen the security logs. The camera showed him moving through the house at all hours, 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 4:30 a.m. Always awake, always moving, as if stopping meant sinking into something he couldn't escape. One night, at 3 in the morning, she found him in the music room. It was a room she hadn't been in before. A large space at the end of the east wing with a grand piano at its center. The piano was covered in a thin layer of dust. No one played it. Jaemin was sitting on the bench, not at the keys but beside them, his hand resting on the closed fallboard as if touching something alive. Amara stood in the doorway. Was this hers? She asked softly. He didn't turn. Yuna played every evening. Hannah would sit on the floor and press her hands to the wood. She said it was how she heard music. Through touch. Amara walked into the room. She sat beside him on the bench, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. She drew her, Amara said. Your wife. Sitting right here. For the first time since she'd known him, Kang Jaemin Okoye closed his eyes. Not sleeping. She could see the tension in his face, the fight not to fall into whatever waited behind his eyelids. But resting. Just for a moment. She was the only person who could make me stop working, he said. She'd sit at this piano and play Debussy, and I'd lose 3 hours. I'd look up and the sun would be gone, and she'd be smiling at me like I was the one making the music. His hand moved on the fallboard. His fingers curled. I was in Busan the night she died, he said. A business meeting. She called me at 10. I didn't answer. I was in the middle of a negotiation, and I thought, I'll call her back. There's always time. His voice dropped to almost nothing. There wasn't. Amara felt tears on her cheeks before she realized she was crying. She wiped them quickly, but not quickly enough. He opened his eyes, looked at her face, looked at the tears. Don't, he said, not harshly, gently, with a tenderness that broke her more than grief ever could. Don't cry for me, he whispered. I'm not crying for you, she said. I'm crying for the version of you that answered the phone. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Collision. The jealousy came like a slow fire. Park De-young returned to the Kong mansion 3 weeks after the gala. Officially, it was a business meeting, syndicate negotiations, supply chain discussions, the kind of language that masked violence in boardroom vocabulary. Jaemin received him in the study. But De-young found reasons to linger. He complimented the food Mrs. Bay served, asking specifically about that incredible seasoning and learning it was Amara's addition. He requested the recipe. He walked through the garden during a break and happened upon Amara reading on the stone bench. Still just a maid? He asked, smiling. A waste. I'm content, Amara said. Contentment and ambition aren't opposites. He sat beside her, too close, too casual. I have a restaurant opening in Gangnam. I need someone who understands flavor. The pay would be. She's not available. Jaemin's voice came from the garden entrance. He stood in the archway, silhouetted against the gray sky, his hands loose at his sides. The tattoo was fully visible, collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the lion and dragon climbing his arm like living armor. Dae-young stood. Jaemin, I heard what you were simply. Jaemin's gaze moved from Dae-young to Amara and back. The meeting resumes in 5 minutes. I suggest you be in the study. Dae-young's smile tightened. He inclined his head, just barely, a gesture of submission disguised as politeness, and walked away. The garden fell silent. Amara looked at Jaemin. I can handle myself. I know. Then why did you? Because I don't trust him. You don't trust anyone. No. He walked closer, stopped at the edge of the bench, looking down at her. I don't. But when it comes to you, I trust even less. The words hit her like a wave. The question, he said quietly, is why. He held her gaze for a long moment. Too long, too intense. The kind of look that rewires something fundamental in the brain circuitry. Then he turned and walked back to the house. Amara sat on the bench, her book forgotten in her lap, her heart doing something that had nothing to do with fear. Confession and sign. That evening, Amara sat with Hannah and told her about Lagos. Not the murder, not the running. She told her about the music, about her mother, Adiz Okafor, who had been a piano teacher in Seoul, who had believed that music was the only language that didn't need translation. She taught me to play, Amara signed, Beethoven, Chopin, and then Nigerian high life, songs about love, about leaving, about coming home. Hannah watched her hands with fierce attention. My mother played Beethoven too, Hannah signed. Asterisk, Moonlight Sonata. Every night. Asterisk, I know that piece, Amara signed. Asterisk, I played at my mother's funeral. Asterisk, Hannah's hands stilled. Her eyes filled. I'm sorry, she signed. Asterisk, she would have loved you. She always said the bravest people are the ones who find ways to be heard when the world tries to make them silent. Asterisk, Hannah reached out and took Amara's hands. They sat like that for a moment, connected by touch and understanding. Then Hannah signed. Asterisk, my father is changing. Asterisk, Amara's pulse quickened. Asterisk, changing how? Asterisk, he looks at me now, in the hallways. He doesn't come inside, but he looks. Yesterday, he left a new set of charcoal pencils outside my door. The expensive kind. Asterisk, Amara felt her eyes sting. It's because of you. Asterisk, Hannah signed. Asterisk, he sees what you do. He doesn't know how to do it himself. But he sees. Asterisk. Then, with a steadiness that made Amara's breath catch. Asterisk. He looks at you too, you know. Not the way he looks at me. Like something broken he wants to fix. He looks at you like something beautiful he's afraid to touch. Asterisk. Amara couldn't sign back. Her hands wouldn't move. Don't be afraid of him, Hannah signed. Asterisk. He's not what people think. He's just a man who lost the music and forgot how to listen. Asterisk. The night everything changed. It was a Thursday in November when the first threat arrived. A package, left at the front gate. No return address. Director, you brought it to Jaemin's study. Inside, a single photograph of Amara walking in Itaewon, taken recently within the last week. On the back, written in Korean, asterisk, we remember what she saw. Asterisk, Amara didn't know about the package, but she felt the shift in the house immediately. Security doubled. Director Yu's face turned to stone. And Jaemin disappeared. For 3 days, she didn't see him. He wasn't in the kitchen at midnight. He wasn't in the hallway. He wasn't anywhere in the house. The camera she knew about showed his study door closed and locked. On the third night, she couldn't stand it anymore. She went to his study door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again. I know you're in there, she said. I know something happened. And I know you think shutting everyone out is the same as protecting them, but it's not. Silence. Then the lock clicked. She opened the door. The study was dark except for the glow of multiple monitors, security feeds, news channels, phone records. Jamin stood behind his desk, phone in hand, his face carved from shadow. He looked like he'd been waging a war for 3 days, which, Amara realized, he probably had. The tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse in the low light, the dragon and lion locked in eternal combat. "Close the door," he said. She did. He set the phone down, looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not control, not even exhaustion. Fear. Real, honest, devastating fear. Not for himself. For her. "They know you're here," he said. "The syndicate that killed Taeho. They know about you. They've been watching." Amara's stomach dropped, but she stood her ground. "What does that mean?" "It means you're a target. It means every day you're in this house, you're in danger. It means—" He stopped, his hands pressed flat against the desk, his head bowed. "It means I should send you away," he said. "Far away. Somewhere they can't reach you. But you won't." He looked up. "No. Why?" He straightened, walked around the desk, came to stand in front of her. Close, so close that the space between them felt like a held breath. "Because I tried," he said. 3 days ago, when I found the photograph, I told Director Yu to arrange your departure. New identity, flight to a safe country, enough money to start over." He paused, and then I went to Hannah's room, stood outside the door, and I heard, through the wood, through the silence, the sound of my daughter laughing. His voice broke, actually broke, a fracture in the armor he'd built over 6 years. And through the crack, she heard everything. The grief, the guilt, the love he'd buried so deep he'd almost lost it. "She was laughing because of you," he said. "Because you taught her that silence isn't the same as emptiness. Because you sat with her and spoke to her in a language she could hear." He reached out. His hand hovered near her face, not touching, just close, his fingers trembling with the effort of restraint. "If you leave," he said, "I lose her again. And I—" His hand dropped. He stepped back. The mask came down, not fully but enough. "I can't," he said. "I can't lose you both." Amara felt the words hit her like a physical force, a wall of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her backward. She saw the truth of it in his face, the confession he hadn't meant to make, the admission that she had become essential, the terror of a man who controlled everything except the one thing that mattered most. "You won't," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "You won't lose us." He looked at her, and for one long, suspended moment, the world between them held its breath. Then he said, "Come here." She didn't move. "Amara." His voice was barely a whisper. "Please." She stepped forward. 1 step, 2, 3, and then she was close enough to touch, close enough to feel the warmth of him, close enough to see the exact moment his control broke. His hand came up. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, feather-light, reverent, as if she were something sacred and breakable. His thumb brushed her cheek. His breath was unsteady. "This is a mistake," he murmured. "Yes," she said. Neither of them moved. And then, in the dark study, surrounded by screens showing a world that wanted to destroy them, Kong Jae-min Okie lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was 6 years of silence and grief and loneliness compressed into a single point of contact, hungry, desperate, and devastatingly tender. His hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her as if she might vanish. Her fingers found the fabric of his shirt and held on. The kiss was the first thing in 6 years that made him feel something other than pain, and it was the last thing he expected to survive. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing like they'd been underwater. He pressed his forehead to hers. His eyes were closed. "This changes everything," he said. "It already changed everything," she whispered. "The moment I walked into this house." He opened his eyes, looked at her, and in his gaze was a promise that terrified them both. The promise of a man who loved obsessively, protectively, completely. A man who had just found something worth sleeping for. But across Seoul, in a warehouse in Gangnam, Park De-young sat in a chair made of steel and watched the same security photograph of Amara that had been sent to the Kong mansion. He picked up his phone. "She's the witness," he said. A voice on the other end. Then she has to go. Not yet. Dae-young leaned back. His smile was nothing like the one he'd shown Amara in the garden. First, we use her to break him. What you've just heard is only the beginning. Amara and Jaemin's connection has ignited, but the fire that warms them is the same fire that could destroy everything. In Batch 2, the threats close in. Loyalties are tested. Secrets unravel. And the final question becomes devastatingly clear. Can love survive when the world that surrounds it was built on silence, power, and blood? If this story has gripped you, if you felt something in your chest tighten, like this video, share it with someone who needs a story like this, and subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion. You don't want to miss it. The final act. His kiss didn't end the moment their mouths parted. It lingered, in the heat between their bodies, in the tremor of his hand at the back of her neck, in the way his breath caught, as if he'd forgotten how to breathe at all. Kang Jaemin Okiye stood motionless in the dark of his study, forehead pressed to Amara's, eyes closed like a man bracing for impact. Amara felt the shift before she understood it. The warmth of him, the raw, terrifying need, was suddenly edged with something else. A warning, a calculation, as if the kiss had opened a door he'd sworn he'd never unlock, and now the room beyond it was full of consequences. He pulled back slowly. His eyes opened, and the softness there was gone in an instant. Not cold, sharper, more dangerous. The dragon and lion tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse under the low light, as if it had a heartbeat of its own, as if it remembered pain better than he did. They're watching, he said, voice controlled but thin. The syndicate, Dae-young's people, they know you're here. Amara's hands, still gripping his shirt, loosened. Watching how, Jaemin turned toward his monitors. The screens showed the mansion from every angle, front gate, garden paths, hallway corridors, and his door. He tapped a sequence into his keyboard, and a new image filled the largest screen. Amara walking through Itaewon, unaware, her face captured in perfect clarity. The timestamp was recent. Too recent. On the back of the photo, the message glared in Korean. We remember what she saw. Amara stepped closer. You said they killed Kim Tae-ho. They did. Jaemin's jaw tightened. And Tae-ho wasn't just my wife's brother. He was the bridge between my Korean operations and my Nigerian contacts. The words landed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Amara's stomach dropped. You're telling me this started because of me? No, his voice cut through the dark. It started because of what you witnessed. Because you're the only one who can identify them. Because they think you're leverage. He looked at her then, fully, without the shield of silence. And the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Not fear of her. Fear for her. Amara's heart hammered. She had walked into this house expecting rules, not a war. She had expected distance, not a kiss that felt like a vow. And now, the world was shifting beneath her feet. Hidden truth surfaces. Later that night, when the security team moved through the house like a living chain of steel, Jaemin took Amara to a place he'd never shown anyone. The basement level of the mansion was colder, quieter. The air smelled of stone and old paper. He unlocked a door with a biometric scan. Not the kind used for staff or guests, but something personal, something sacred. Inside was a vault disguised as a modest archive room. Shelves lined with ledgers, contracts, and sealed envelopes. At the center stood a single glass case containing a small object wrapped in black cloth. Jaemin unwrapped it. A piano key, ivory, yellowed with age, etched with a thin crack down its center. Amara's breath caught. Yuna. He nodded once. His fingers hovered over the key, reverent, as if touching it might dissolve the control he'd built around the memory. She played this piano until the day she died, he said. That key broke during a performance. She laughed and said it was a sign that nothing perfect survives, that love survives anyway. He looked at Amara. The intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable. The night she died, he continued, voice dropping, she called me from Seoul. She was crying. She said someone had been in the house, someone who didn't belong. She asked me to come home. Amara felt the truth settle into her bones. Not just grief, guilt. A man who had answered a business call instead of his wife's fear. I told her I was finishing negotiations, he said. I told her I'd call back. I didn't. He swallowed. The tattoo on his neck, the fusion of Korean dragon and African lion, seemed to tighten with his emotion. The next morning, I got the call. Her car had gone off the road. The police said it was an accident, but the details didn't match. The timing didn't match. The syndicate had been circling us for years. Taeho tried to warn me. He tried to pull me out of the darkness. Amara reached out before she could stop herself. Her hand covered his. Warm skin against warm skin. A simple touch that felt like an act of rebellion against the silence that had ruled him. You didn't kill her, she whispered. I didn't save her, he said. That's the same thing in my mind. The room felt heavier than any hallway in the mansion. Because now Amara understood. The insomnia wasn't just exhaustion. It was penance. It was a man refusing sleep, because sleep meant facing the moment he chose wrong. And she understood something else, too. This was why he looked at her like she was the only thing that could pull him back from the edge. Obsession peaks. In the days that followed, Jaemin's presence became constant in a way that no longer felt accidental. He stood behind her in the kitchen as she cooked, close enough that his breath brushed her hair. He watched her hands knead dough, chop vegetables, season with instinctive precision. When she turned, he didn't step back. He stayed, the space between them charged, electric, dangerous. Director, you noticed. The staff noticed. Hannah noticed. Hannah began signing to Amara more often, her hands moving fast with urgency. He's different, she signed. He watches you like you're the only thing keeping him alive. Amara didn't deny it. She couldn't. Jaemin's control sharpened into something possessive but restrained. He began approving every schedule change. He began assigning security not just to the mansion gates, but to Amara's every movement. The garden, the market, the staff quarters. When Park Dae-young called, Jaemin took the call in the hallway where Amara could hear him, his voice low and lethal. You will not approach her again, Jaemin said. Not in my house. Not near my city. Not in your dreams. Dae-young's laugh came through the phone, smooth and confident. Your city? Seoul belongs to money, Jaemin, and money follows power. Your power is slipping. Jaemin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm not slipping, he said. I'm deciding. The call ended. Silence filled the hallway like smoke. Amara stepped into view. You don't have to protect me like I'm fragile. I'm not protecting you because you're fragile, he said. I'm protecting you because you're mine. The word landed between them with the weight of a promise and a threat. His eyes searched hers, for fear, for rejection, for permission. Amara felt something inside her rise to meet him. Not submission, recognition. A woman who understood the language of control because she'd learned it from survival, and who could choose, consciously, deliberately, what to allow and what to refuse. I'm not yours to own, she said softly, but I'm here, with you, by choice. Something in his expression fractured, just enough for her to see the relief beneath the obsession. Emotional vulnerability break. The breaking point came on a rainy evening. Hannah's door opened without warning. The girl stood in the hallway, hands trembling, eyes red. She signed so fast her movements were almost frantic. They're outside, she signed. I saw a man in black near the garden gate. He looked up at my window. He smiled. Amara's heart ceased. Jaemin was already moving, calling security, sending orders, positioning men. But Hannah didn't look at her father. She looked at Amara. I'm scared, Hannah signed. Asterisk, not of the man. What happens if you leave? Amara stepped forward and pulled Hannah into a hug. It was instinctive. The girl stiffened, then melted into it, shoulders shaking. Amara held her tightly, whispering in Igbo, the language of comfort and home. Jaemin watched from the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't command. He simply stood there, motionless, as if his own body had forgotten how to move. When Hannah finally pulled back, she signed, Fix it, Father. Fix us. The words hit him like a physical blow. His face tightened, and for the first time since Amara had known him, tears gathered in his eyes. Not a flood, just a single drop that slipped down his cheek before he wiped it away with the back of his hand, as if ashamed of needing anything at all. I don't know how, he admitted, voice raw. Amara turned to him. Then learn. The hallway felt like a crossroads. A man who had built a life on silence, standing in the wreckage of it. A daughter who had been made invisible, finally asking to be seen. And a woman who had crossed oceans to escape danger, now choosing to stay in the middle of it because love, real love, demanded courage. Jealousy plus external threat. The next morning, Park Dae-young arrived at the mansion under the pretense of a private negotiation. He was allowed inside only because Jae-min wanted to face him directly to end the dance of shadows. Dae-young's eyes found Amara immediately. He smiled, polite and sharp. "Ms. Okafor," he said, "you look well. I've been thinking about that restaurant offer. Seoul is full of opportunities for someone with your talent." Amara didn't smile back. "I'm not interested." "Everyone is interested in something," he replied. "Sometimes they just don't know it yet." Jae-min stepped between them. The air changed. His posture was calm, but the tension radiating off him was unmistakable. Controlled jealousy, the kind that didn't explode, the kind that made the room feel smaller. "You're done here," Jae-min said. Dae-young's smile faded. "You think you can keep her locked in your tower forever? She's not a trophy. She's a witness. People like us don't get happy endings, Jae-min. We get leverage." Jae-min's hand moved, not to strike, not to threaten physically, but to the small device in his pocket. A signal. Security moved in, surrounding Dae-young with quiet precision. "You're right about one thing," Jae-min said. "People like us don't get happy endings unless we fight for them." Dae-young's eyes narrowed. Then fight. The threat was explicit now, not implied. Real. A rival syndicate ready to use Amara as a weapon, ready to dismantle everything Jae-min had built if it meant tearing him apart from the inside. Amara watched Jae-min's face. She saw the decision forming there, not just about power, but about love, about whether control could become protection without becoming possession. Intimate moment. That night, the mansion went quiet in a way that felt different. Not empty. Charged. Amara found Jae-min in the music room again. The dust-covered piano stood like a ghost of a happier life. He sat on the bench, hands resting on the keys without pressing them, as if afraid the sound would shatter him. She sat beside him, close, their shoulders almost touching. The tattoo on his neck was visible, the dragon and lion intertwined, a symbol of legacy, pain, and power, now shared in the space between them. "Play something," she whispered. He looked at her. "I haven't played in 6 years." "Then start with one note." His fingers trembled. He pressed a key. A single, pure sound filled the room. Soft, aching, impossibly beautiful. Then another, and another. Not Debussy, not perfection, just a melody, raw and human. The sound of a man learning how to feel without running. Amara's eyes filled. She didn't look away. She let him see her tears, let him see what he did to her. Not fear, not pain, but devotion. "I'm scared," he admitted, voice barely audible. "Not of them. Of losing you." "You won't," she said. "Not if we face it together." He turned to her fully. His hand lifted, slow and reverent, and brushed her cheek. His thumb traced the curve of her mouth. The world outside, the threats, the syndicates, the silence fell away. And in the dim light of the music room, Kang Jimin Okoye kissed her again, deeply, desperately, with a tenderness that promised protection without chains. A love that didn't demand obedience, but offered presence. Fade to black. The breaking point. The morning after shattered everything. Security intercepted a second package at the gate. This one contained a USB drive and a note. "We have footage. We have witnesses. Give her to us, or we expose your empire." Director Yu's face went pale. Sung-ho's hands shook. Even the guards, men trained to show nothing, looked frightened in a way that made the house feel like it was cracking. Jae-min watched the footage on his monitors. A grainy video of Amara in Lagos, standing frozen in the market alley, eyes wide as Kim Tae-ho was dragged away. The angle proved what Amara had always known. Someone else had been there. Someone had recorded it. Dae-young's voice came through the speakers on the drive. "Calm. Calculated. She's not yours, Jae-min. She's evidence." Jae-min's control snapped, not into rage, but into decision. He turned to Amara. You have to leave, he said. Amara stared at him. No, I'm not asking. His voice was rough, brutal with love. I'm telling you, the syndicate will use you to destroy me. And if they destroy me, Hannah is next. Amara's eyes burned. So you're choosing for me? I'm choosing to keep you alive. And what about what I choose? Her voice rose, steady and fierce. I chose to stay. I chose you. I chose Hannah. You don't get to erase that because you're scared. Hannah appeared in the doorway, signing urgently. Don't go, she pleaded. Don't leave me again. Amara looked at Hannah, looked at Jaemin, and she understood the cruel truth. If she stayed, she became a weapon pointed at the people she loved. If she left, she broke the fragile bond that had begun to heal them. I'm not leaving you behind, Amara said, voice trembling. But I'm not staying to be used. She grabbed her coat. She grabbed the photograph of her mother from her dresser. She stepped into the hallway, tears falling freely now, and turned back one last time. I will come back, she whispered, when you're ready to love me without fear. Then she walked out, not defeated but unbreakable. Final confrontation. Jaemin didn't chase her immediately. He did something harder. He let her go. For 12 hours, the mansion felt like a tomb. Hannah stopped eating. The staff moved in silence. And Jaemin, for the first time in 6 years, faced the dark without distraction. He watched the footage again. He listened to Dae-young's taunts. He saw the pattern. The syndicate didn't just want Amara. They wanted to prove that Kang Jaemin Okoye was human, that he could be hurt, that love could be used against him. And in that realization, something shifted. Control was not strength. Control was fear wearing armor. At dawn, he called a meeting in a public place, the National Press Center. Not hiding, not bargaining, standing in the light. He brought Hannah with him, holding her hand in a way he never had before, openly, without shame. He brought evidence, the USB drive, the original photograph from Lagos, the truth about Kim Taeho's death and the syndicate's role. He spoke clearly, calmly, the tattoo on his neck fully visible, a symbol of his legacy laid bare. I have built an empire, he said, voice steady, but I have lost myself inside it. I have used silence as a weapon. I have used fear as protection, and I have hurt the people I love most. He looked at Hannah. My daughter deserves to be seen. She deserves to be heard. He looked into the cameras. And the woman I love, Amara Okafor, is not leverage. She is my future. The room went silent. The world listened. Because Kang Jaemin Okoye had never spoken like this before. Not as a mafia boss, not as a billionaire, but as a man. Behind the scenes, the syndicate's power collapsed under scrutiny. Dae-young's connections unraveled. The threats dissolved into arrests, exposure, and the kind of public accountability that made leverage impossible. Amara returned 3 days later. She stood at the front gate, suitcase in hand, eyes red but steady. The mansion that had once felt like a cage now felt like a choice waiting to be made. Jaemin met her at the threshold. He didn't grab her. He didn't command. He stepped forward and lowered himself, not fully to his knees, but into a posture of vulnerability that matched the truth in his eyes. I can't promise a life without danger, he said, but I can promise you a life where you're never secret, where Hannah is never invisible, where I sleep beside you, not haunted by what I failed to do. Amara's breath shook. And you will sleep? I will, he said, because you taught me that rest isn't surrender. It's trust. Hannah appeared behind him, signing with trembling hands. Please stay, she signed. Stay forever. Amara walked into the house, into the light, into the love, and into a future she had once thought impossible. 6 months later, in a quiet ceremony at the edge of the garden beneath the magnolia tree, Kang Jaemin Okoye and Amara Okafor stood together. Hannah stood between them, hands clasped with both of theirs. The tattoo on Jaemin's neck, the dragon and lion, fused into one unbroken circle, caught the sunlight like a promise kept. They spoke vows that needed no translation, no fear, no silence. And when the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the house that had known 6 years of sleepless darkness finally held something it had never held before. Peace. Amara leaned into him, and Jaemin closed his eyes, not to escape, but to rest, to sleep, to love. Rest isn't surrender, he whispered. It's love finally choosing us.